Hi, I'm Erin. Thank you for joining me for another Intro to Yoga series tutorial. Today we're going to be covering plank, side plank, forearm plank, and dolphin pose. So we'll just get started in high plank, and high plank was briefly covered in our chaturanga tutorial, but we're going to revisit it today. Really important to have proper alignment in high plank so that we avoid any injuries to the wrists or shoulders. So coming onto our mat, we're going to find our alignment with our shoulders over our wrists. So let's just start here on our knees. Fingers are going to be spread nice and wide, really solid foundation through the hands, and just move around and find the shoulders right over the wrists. Okay, so we don't want them too far forward, too far back. We're working toward keeping our head in line with the spine. So focusing first here from the crown of the head. Again, we want to avoid lifting the head up too high so the chin is jutting out, or of course drooping the chin and having the head dangle while we're in our high plank. So modification for high plank is to have the knees on the floor, and it's not going to look like this position that I'm in now, which is tabletop. So I'll show you the modification after we visit the full posture. So one more thing to keep in mind before we lift our knees off the floor that we want to avoid in high plank is having the shoulders sag, or the chest sag, rather. So we don't want to have the chest sagging toward the floor and the shoulders hunching up. We also want to avoid rounding the upper back and lifting it too high up. We want to have the shoulders and the chest in one nice long line so that the head is in line with the spine all the way going back through the legs. So traveling down toward the legs before we lift the knees off the floor. High plank, we do have to have a lot of core awareness and core strength, and we build core strength in high plank. So the first thing we want to do is draw the belly button back toward the spine so that our core is nice and engaged and not just hanging out. The stronger and steadier our core, the easier the posture is going to be. So let's just go for it. We're going to walk the feet back, the toes are going to tuck under, and then we're going to take the feet to hip distance apart. So again, we're avoiding having the feet too wide or touching, and instead have them at hip distance apart. We're going to lift those knees off the floor. We're going to tighten up through our quadriceps so we don't want nice strong legs. We're going to press those heels back and keep the head in line with the spine. So legs are strong, core is engaged. We're avoiding sagging, we're avoiding hunching, we're avoiding lifting the chin or dropping the chin. We're avoiding letting the belly hang, pulling the belly button back toward the spine. So it's a really challenging pose. I'm already shaking a little bit. So modification for side plank is to release the knees to the floor. So notice the difference between tabletop with the knees underneath the hips and modified plank with the knees further back, toes are still tucked under, chest is still nice and wide, head is in line with the spine. So high plank modification, and then one more modification for high plank if we have wrist issues. If this is too much on the wrists, we can bring the hands into fists. If we bring the hands into fists, we want to be on the flat of our upper fingers, okay? Hands in fists, we also want to avoid, can't even really do it too much, having the wrists bend too much. Okay, so one nice long line. Okay, last, show you hands and fists. Okay, and last thing I want to mention in high plank, because it's a tendency of mine, is to avoid hyperextending the elbows like I just did. Ooh, yuck. Have a nice, soft, very slight bend in the elbows. All right, high plank, modified high plank. Let's move on now to forearm plank, which forearm plank is a posture in and of itself. Forearm plank is also a really nice modification for high plank because if you have wrist issues, because you're not on your wrists. So in forearm plank, come back kind of into our tabletop position. We'll take the forearms down onto the mat, spread the fingers nice and wide once again. And we want our forearms parallel to the sides of our mat and parallel to one another. So one thing that happens in forearm plank as we build strength in our shoulders, and is common because my shoulders aren't as strong, upper back, is that the hands start to slide together, okay? So we really want to plant the hands firmly on the mat, press into the palms, spread the fingers wide. Knees are on the floor right now. We want to walk the feet back just like we did in high plank. Feet in line with the hips. Okay, things to avoid: sagging hips, lifting hips, sagging shoulders, hunching shoulders. We want one straight line from the crown of the head back through the heels. Modification, forearm plank, just set the knees on the floor. A little different than the position I was just in, setting up for forearm plank. So the knees are nice, or the legs are nice and extended, but the knees just released to the floor. Forearm plank. So from forearm plank, I'm just gonna go right into dolphin pose, because forearm plank is gonna be our setup for dolphin pose. So from forearm plank, just like going into a downward facing dog, our toes are tucked under. We want to start to lift the hips high, press them high up and back, and we press the heels down toward the floor. I'm gonna walk my toes in just a smidgen, press those heels down, press into the forearms, press into the palms of the hands. So once again, I struggle in this posture because my upper back and shoulders tend to be a little bit weaker. So a modification, so I'm working toward keeping my forearms parallel. That's really what I want to do to build the strength in my shoulders. But a modification that's great to have at your fingertips in dolphin pose is to interlace the hands and make a little triangle here on your forearms. So it looks like this on the mat. Hands are pressed together. We're in our nice dolphin position, but now the hands are interlaced. Okay, so this is a great modification for dolphin pose. So we're working toward strengthening our shoulders. We bring those forearms parallel. Ooh, and that's just really challenging for me. So I like to have that modification handy. It's a good one. We're gonna go from dolphin pose into side plank now. Side plank and the modifications for side plank. So I'm going to show you the full expression of side plank first, Vashisthasana, the Sanskrit name, and then I'll give you all the modifications that you can use at any time in class. So let's see, we'll start from a high plank position, which we've already covered. So you just come into your high plank. All right, and a nice way to go into side plank is to draw the feet to touch. We're just going to go on, I'm going to go onto my left hand first, so I'm looking at you, the camera. I'm gonna take that hand, shoulders right over the wrist, and we're just gonna roll onto the outer edge of that left foot. Okay, so right now my feet are stacked. My hip is lifted off the floor. The arm extends straight up overhead, the palm faces out. We want the shoulders stacked. We want the hips stacked. We want the feet stacked. Okay, so common things to avoid, of course, are hunching the shoulders, opening up too much, rounding the hips. Okay, now with the feet though, modifications for side plank. There are a multitude of modifications. So first things first, let's just start with the feet. So you can stagger the feet instead of stack them. A little more supportive for the balance. Okay, we can take the top foot, place it on the floor in front of us, more supportive. So when we place the foot on the floor, we want the knee directly over the ankle. Great modification for side plank. All right, and I'm gonna switch arms because this arm is starting to shake. And of course, you always wanna do everything on both sides. So I'm gonna give you a couple more modifications. So now I'm side plank on my right side. So got feet stacked, staggered, foot to the floor. Other modification for side plank is to bring your bottom knee to the floor. Okay, so when we come into a modified side plank with the bottom knee on the floor, we do want to position ourselves so our hip comes over our knee. Okay, arm is still straight up, foot is still extended. One long line, shoulder, hip to ankle. Again, just avoiding hunching, rounding, rolling the hips, all of those things that I already mentioned. And hyperextending, I just felt myself do it. A little bend in that elbow. All right, so there's your modifications for side plank. So just as in High plank to forearm plank. Another modification, and it's also a pose in and of itself, is forearm side plank, okay? So for forearm side plank, we're gonna take our forearm and we're gonna bring it parallel to the front of the mat. Once again, we spread the fingers wide, press into the palm of the hand, nice solid foundation. And for our alignment, we want our shoulder right over our elbow. We're just gonna start to, with the support of this left hand on the floor, and just start to walk our feet back. And once again, we'll stack those feet, stack the hips, stack the shoulders. We can extend the left arm up overhead. So this is a great modification and a challenging pose in and of itself. If you have wrist issues, again, you can come onto your forearm instead of your hand. Okay, modifications for forearm side plank. Same, stagger the feet. The only one we can't really do is to take that bottom knee to the floor, but you can take your top foot to the floor. Okay, forearm plank, forearm side plank. I think that's all I was going to cover in this tutorial, so I hope you learned a lot, and I highly recommend when you're practicing these poses and learning them that you practice the modifications, because even if you can do the pose one day and then the next day your wrist feels tweaky or maybe you're just more tired, you can always have these modifications ready for you. And it's great in a yoga class so that you can still practice your class even if you're dealing with an injury or some other limitation on any particular day. So thanks again for joining me. Have a pleasant day. Namaste.